One pervasive problem of practice that all educators share is the persistent achievement gap in America's schools. People of color and those living in poverty struggle to succeed in an educational system that inadequately supports their chances for achievement. Engagement in inquiry can be a powerful pathway to the creation of more equitable classrooms. Let's meet a teacher and a principal who have used the process of inquiry to try to achieve this goal.
My heart is really focused on trying to prepare students for college in a global economy, and in particular trying to find students who are what I view as non-traditional AP students, and try and create an environment for them to be in an AP class. When I first started teaching, disproportionately there was literally a dearth of minority students and first-generation college students. The question was, how could I get what I viewed as non-traditional AP students into my AP classes?
Most of the children he was teaching in these courses all looked the same. So he turned to the process of inquiry to wonder about what would it look like? How might I be able to increase access and make a challenging, rigorous college preparation curriculum more accessible to all learners, not just a particular few. So that actually was something that ended up transforming his entire school. He had to, through the process of inquiry, actually with this wondering, he had to have numerous conversations with the guidance counselor who had particular, in essence, barriers up as to who was allowed to take AP classes, and in order to make a case for that, he had to collect some data and read some literature to make a case. So that's all part of the inquiry process and a beauty of the inquiry process. He also had to think about, how can I help these young learners that I'm inviting into this challenging curriculum? How can I ensure their success? So a big part of the inquiry work he did was implementing a policy in his class called a guaranteed C.
It's posted on my wall, and it says, if you attend my class regularly, if you're not a pain in my backside, if you earn a minimum of 70 on every notebook check, which involves a lot of work, if you take every test and every quiz, and if you complete points makeup on every test, then you get a guaranteed C. This was intended to provide a safety net to allow new students into this very rigorous environment, and with having at least taken away some of that fear of failure.
And then he used the process of inquiry to really dig deep into all of the learners in his classroom and better understand how they were experiencing his AP class, his AP curriculum. As he was engaged in inquiry, he could make adjustments, not just to the policy, but to his curriculum as well. So what's the bottom line? What's the impact that inquiry has on students? There's a great example. Through Gary's inquiry and his work, he increased access to some of the most rigorous classes in his curriculum. He had students that ordinarily would not take those classes, would not be on a track to get accepted into colleges because they were not having a rigorous high school curriculum. He changed those students' lives by giving them the opportunity through inquiry to have access to classes that they ordinarily wouldn't have, classes that prepared them for college, and classes, probably more importantly, inspired them to apply to college and attend college, where prior to that time, they didn't believe college was something that was in their futures. So does inquiry have an impact on student and student learning? The bottom line is absolutely yes. Like Gary, elementary school principal Tia Sackison turned to inquiry to help her school dig deeper into issues of equity.
And how does it seem like everybody's understanding?
When I first got here, we had about 49% of our kids were on free or reduced lunch, and it didn't seem as significant of an issue, but it was growing. And you know, with the economy tanking and all sorts of things happening outside of us, our free and reduced lunch population was growing, and then the next thing I knew, it was 59%, and then it was 68%. This year it's hit 80%. And I think it was bigger than poverty. I was looking at marginalized kids, those invisible kids within our school. Do we have them, and are we recognizing it? Do we have an awareness? What are we doing about it? And I had a conversation with the teacher about an ESE student. And I felt like she saw that kid as a special ed kid, and her expectations were here, and the response in our conversation to what his needs might be were, well, he's got an IEP, he's a special ed kid, so, you know, a little shoulder shrug, like, what can you expect? And I thought, is that really where we are in our minds, that this child comes from a disadvantaged home, this child doesn't have supportive parents, this child doesn't speak English, these parents don't get involved, this child has an IEP. Is that where we are in our thought process here? Because if that's where my school is, that's not good.
Tia turned to her leadership team for help in engaging all her faculty in a school-wide inquiry to surface stereotypes they might hold, understand the impact these stereotypes have on their teaching, and take action to change. The leadership team planned faculty meetings using many activities and protocols designed to help everyone look at their subjectivities, perceptions, and biases, and collected observational and survey data to document what the faculty discovered about their practice.
We did so many things as a staff. We went outside and did a lineup protocol where we stood in the horizontal line and called out topics like step forward if you had 50 books in your home when you grew up, and step backwards if you didn't. Step forward if you grew up with two parents, step backward if you didn't. Oh my gosh, that was so profound for people. We were developing an awareness on stereotypes up until that point, but this mid-year event, we stood outside under the PE pavilion, and at the end of this protocol, there are some people way in the front and some people way in the back, and they were shocked because that was personal. The debrief on that activity was profound. I mean, people will still talk about it. There were people crying. I never thought about my upbringing in this way. I had one staff member who grew up with two parents and felt like, you know, she lived this really textbook middle-class life, and she ended up in the back. And she thought, how did that happen? How did I end up in the back? She goes, I never pictured, you know, my life being any different than, you know, the teacher in the room next door to me. And then there was somebody in the front who was completely shocked. She ended up in the front. And then there was a better connection. So this is the upbringing I had and the life I had, and maybe now that's why I have this stereotype in my head. We were really working on understanding our families, understanding our kids better. I guess the first step was becoming aware of these stereotypes that we might have, and acknowledging them, like a 12-step program. Awareness is a first step. If you know they're out there and you know that maybe that stereotype you have of the ESE child, they have an IEP, so your expectations are here. If you have that stereotype, maybe you better be aware of it, step back. What are we going to do about that? Because that is probably interfering with your ability to reach that child and provide the equitable education that that child deserves. The other pieces that I've been tucking in this year is I wanted to move in the direction of the concept of privilege.
Through inquiry, Tia was able to tackle one of education's most pervasive problems and gain insight for herself and for her faculty that transformed their teaching. We learned from Gary and Tia that inquiry is a powerful mechanism for addressing issues of equity in education and, more important, doing something about it.